the clink of crystal against mahogany, the amber glow of a proper dram by the fire, the warmth of whisky that's been distilled in Scotland for centuries. We've ranked 20 of Britain's most famous Scotch brands from worst to best, and some of these will have you choking on your nightcap. Let's see if your favourite made the cut. Loch Dhu, which means Black Loch in Gaelic, is one of the most notorious whiskies ever bottled, and not in a good way. Mannockmore Distillery released it in the 90s with black colouring, added to make it look dramatic and mysterious, but what they actually created was whiskey that tasted like someone mixed decent Speyside malt with burnt rubber and regret. People bought bottles because they looked interesting on the shelf, took one sip, and relegated them to the back of the cupboard where they stayed for decades. The taste is bitter, astringent, with an unpleasant chemical sweetness that comes from whatever they used to turn it black, and the finish lingers in all the wrong ways. It was discontinued after a few years because even at the height of 90s whiskey experimentation, people recognised that dyeing whiskey black and charging premium prices for the privilege was taking the piss. It ranks dead last because it represents everything wrong with gimmick whiskey: style over substance, marketing over craftsmanship, and a fundamental misunderstanding of what makes Scottish whiskey actually worth drinking. Macallan's is a supermarket blend that exists purely to fill the gap between "I need whiskey" and "I've only got £8." It's a blended Scotch that's technically legal and drinkable, but utterly forgettable. Thin, harsh, with that chemical burn that cheap whiskey always has. Back in the 70s, when money was tight and proper whiskey was for special occasions, this was the sort of bottle that got bought out of necessity and regretted the next morning. The taste is vaguely whiskey-shaped, but with none of the warmth, complexity or pleasure that makes Scotch worth drinking. It's mixing whiskey for people who want to get drunk rather than enjoy the journey. And there's a place for that at 3 a.m, but it's nowhere near the top of any ranking that involves taste or quality. White and Mackay is a proper Scottish blend that's been around since Victorian times, but it's always been the budget option that people bought when they wanted something drinkable without breaking the bank. It's smooth enough, slightly sweet, perfectly acceptable for mixing with ginger or cola, but there's nothing about it that makes you want to drink it neat and savour it. The traditional place for a bottle like this was in the sideboard for visitors who weren't important enough for the good stuff. The triple maturation process they bang on about in the marketing makes it smoother than it should be at this price point, which is something, but smooth isn't the same as good. It ranks here because it's honest, cheap whiskey that doesn't pretend to be anything else. And sometimes that's all you need when you're having a nightcap before bed and don't want to think too hard about it. William Lawson's is another supermarket blend that's huge in Europe, but barely registers in Britain, which tells you everything you need to know about how seriously we take it. It's light, easy drinking, inoffensive to the point of being almost characterless, and gets the job done without making you grateful you opened the bottle. Blokes who drink it do so because it's on offer, or because they genuinely don't care what they're drinking, as long as it's whiskey-shaped and alcoholic. The taste is thin, slightly sweet, with a harsh finish that reminds you you're drinking cheap blended Scotch rather than anything with heritage or craftsmanship. It's perfectly fine for pouring into coffee on a cold morning, or mixing into a whiskey and coke when you're already 6 pints deep. But drinking it neat is an admission that you've either run out of better whiskey or never had any to begin with. Grant's is Britain's third biggest Scotch, which proves that volume and quality don't always go hand in hand. It's a perfectly decent blended whiskey that does everything adequately without excelling at anything. Smooth enough to drink neat, characterful enough to not be offensive, cheap enough to buy without thinking twice. Back in the 80s, when people wanted something better than supermarket blend but couldn't justify single malt prices, Grant's filled that gap reliably. The triangular bottle is distinctive, the whiskey inside is forgettable, but reliable. And that's the entire Grant's experience in a nutshell. It ranks here because it's the definition of middle-of-the-road whiskey. Not good enough to get excited about, not bad enough to avoid, just there when you need it. Bell's is what gets drunk every Christmas and every Burns night without fail. carrying on a tradition that spans generations. It's Britain's biggest selling Scotch, and that's because it's everywhere, affordable and consistently decent, rather than because it's exceptional. The taste is robust, slightly smoky, with a spicy finish that reminds you you're drinking proper Scotch rather than some smooth corporate blend designed to offend nobody. Blokes who drink Bells know exactly what they're getting. Honest Scottish whisky that tastes like whisky should, without any pretension or craft distillery nonsense. It's mixing whisky primarily, though some die-hard Bells drinkers will fight you if you suggest adding anything to it. The problem is that Bells has been overtaken by better blends and more interesting single malts, and while it's still perfectly drinkable, it's no longer the default choice it once was. It ranks here because it represents solid working-class Scottish whisky that's been keeping British men warm for generations, and that heritage deserves respect, even if the whisky itself is nothing spectacular. Famous Grouse is Scotland's favourite whisky, which either says something about Scottish taste or something about Scottish thriftiness, depending on your perspective. It's a smooth, approachable blend that's been the gateway whisky for generations of British men who wanted to graduate from beer to spirits without shocking their palates. The typical journey into whisky often starts with Famous Grouse in middle age, when lager seems less dignified and something more sophisticated is called for. And it sticks around because it's reliable, available everywhere, and doesn't cost a fortune. The taste is gentle. Honey, malt, a bit of smoke. Nothing challenging or complex, but nothing offensive either. It's whisky training wheels for people who want to learn to appreciate Scotch without diving straight into peaty Islay malts that taste like burning hospitals. Famous Grouse ranks here because it does exactly what it's supposed to do: introduce people to whisky, keep prices reasonable, and maintain consistent quality. But it's never going to set your world on fire or make you evangelical about Scottish distilling. Teachers is old-school blended Scotch with a higher proportion of single malt than most cheap blends, which gives it more character and complexity than you'd expect at this price point. It's got a distinctively smoky, slightly peaty flavour that comes from the Ardmore malt at its heart, and people who grew up drinking Teachers in the 70s will tell you it's criminally underrated. The traditional setting for Teachers was Friday night card games where blokes would drink it neat with a splash of water while talking absolute rubbish until midnight. The taste is robust, warming, with enough smoke to remind you you're drinking Scottish whisky rather than some smooth, international blend designed for people who don't actually like whisky. The problem is that Teachers has been overtaken by trendier brands and doesn't get the recognition it deserves, but whisky drinkers who know their stuff still rate it highly for what it is. It ranks here because it's genuinely good blended Scotch that punches well above its weight. And if you're looking for proper Scottish whisky without spending single malt money, Teachers is where you should be looking. Red Label is the entry-level Johnny Walker that's sold in every pub, club and corner shop in Britain. And it's got that harsh, fiery character that makes it perfect for mixing but painful to drink neat. It's young, aggressive whisky that hasn't had time to mellow, and you can taste that raw spirit burn with every sip. Blokes drink Red Label with Coke or ginger, and they drink it in volume when they're out, because it's reliably available and gets you where you're going without costing a fortune. In younger years, when palates were less developed and wallets thinner, Red Label at weddings and Christmas parties was standard fare, before graduation to Black Label or single malts came with age and experience. Red Label represents Johnny Walker at its most democratic, whisky for the masses that doesn't pretend to be anything other than what it is. It ranks here because while it's not sipping whisky by any stretch, it's a legitimate Scotch with heritage and consistency, and sometimes that's enough when you're 10 deep on a Friday night and just need something that tastes like whisky. Cutty Sark is light, pale blended Scotch that was massive in America during Prohibition and never quite recovered its prestige over here. It's smooth, gentle, almost delicate compared to the robust blends that dominated British drinking. And that made it perfect for cocktails, but less appealing to blokes who wanted their whisky to taste like whisky. The 80s saw people trying Cutty Sark during adventurous moments, deciding it was too light and flowery, and returning to Bells or Famous Grouse for something with more backbone. The taste is refined, vanilla, citrus, honey, but it lacks the character that makes Scottish whisky Scottish. It's whisky for people who find normal whisky too intense, which is either a compliment or an insult depending on whether you think whisky should challenge you or comfort you. Cutty Sark ranks here because it's well-made, consistent, and has genuine heritage, but it's never been a British favourite because we like our whisky to have a bit more fight in it. If you're enjoying this ranking and arguing with me about where your favourite sits, do me a favour and hit that like button, drop a comment with your biggest disagreement, and subscribe so you don't miss the next ranking that'll have you shouting at your screen. Right, let's continue. Black Label is where Johnny Walker gets serious. 12 years old, properly complexed with smoky Islay malts balanced against sweet Speyside and everything in between. It's the whisky that marks a transition from casual drinking to genuine appreciation, typically coinciding with first promotions and the realisation that something better than Red Label and Coke is deserved. The taste is rich, smooth, with layers of smoke, fruit, spice and oak that reveal themselves as you sip it, and it's strong enough at 40% to warm you properly without knocking you sideways. Blokes who drink Black Label know they're drinking quality whisky, and they'll drink it neat with maybe a splash of water to open it up. It's become the default premium blend, the whisky you order when you want something good but don't want to navigate the intimidating world of single malts. Black Label ranks here because it's genuinely excellent blended Scotch that proves that blends can compete with single malts when they're done properly, and the fact that it's globally available and consistently good makes it a benchmark against which other whiskies are measured. Chivas is luxury blended Scotch for people who want to feel sophisticated. 12 years old, smooth as silk, presented in a bottle that looks expensive even when you've got it on special offer. It's sweeter and smoother than Johnny Walker Black, with honey, vanilla and orchard fruits rather than smoke and peat, which makes it more approachable but less distinctively Scottish. Bottles of Chivas often arrive as Christmas presents from people wanting to impress, and they get saved for special occasions because drinking it feels like an event. The taste is luxurious, creamy, rich, perfectly balanced, and it goes down so easily that you forget you're drinking 40% alcohol until you stand up. Chivas represents aspirational drinking for British men who've made something of themselves and want whisky that reflects that, and there's nothing wrong with that, even if whisky purists might sneer. It ranks here because it's genuinely beautiful whisky that's been blended with skill and care, and just because it's smooth and accessible doesn't mean it's not excellent. Monkey Shoulder changed British whisky drinking when it launched. A blended malt, only single malts, no grain whisky, that was affordable, approachable, and marketed toward younger drinkers who'd been intimidated by traditional Scotch. The name comes from a condition distillery workers got from turning barley, and the cheeky branding made it feel less stuffy than traditional whisky collections. The taste is smooth, sweet, with vanilla, honey, and subtle spice. Easy to drink neat, but also brilliant in cocktails, which was revolutionary for proper Scottish whisky. Men in their 30s and 40s discovered Monkey Shoulder when they got bored of beer and wanted something more grown up, and it became their gateway into actually caring about what they were drinking. It ranks here because it's bridged the gap between traditional Scotch and modern drinking culture, and it's proved that you can make whisky accessible and fun without compromising on quality or authenticity. Glenmorangie is Highland single malt whisky for people who are ready to leave blends behind and explore what individual distilleries can do. The original is 10 years old, matured in ex-bourbon casks, and it's got that distinctive Glenmorangie character. Light, floral, citrusy, with vanilla and honey from the American oak. The typical journey into Glenmorangie happens when sophistication calls for single malts, and the gentle, approachable flavour doesn't scare people off like some of the more intense whiskies might. It's whisky that doesn't demand expertise to enjoy. You can drink it neat, with water, even with ice if that's how you like it, and it'll still taste beautiful. The tall, elegant bottles look classy on the shelf, and the whisky inside lives up to that promise. Glenmorangie ranks here because it's the perfect introduction to single malt Scotch. Complex enough to be interesting, gentle enough to be approachable, consistent enough to trust, and Highland enough to taste authentically Scottish. Glenfiddich is the biggest selling single malt in the world, and it earned that position by being consistently excellent and widely available for decades. The 12-year-old is classic Speyside, fruity, slightly sweet, with pear and apple notes balanced by subtle oak. First bottles of Glenfiddich often mark the transition into proper single malt territory, and that distinctive triangular bottle sits on the shelf like a trophy, proving you've made it. The taste is refined but not challenging, smooth enough for beginners, interesting enough for experienced whiskey drinkers, versatile enough to drink however you like it. Glenfiddich represents the democratization of single malt whiskey. It brought what was once rare and expensive to the masses without compromising quality. It ranks here because it's the benchmark single malt against which everything else is measured, and the fact that it's maintained quality and character despite massive commercial success is genuinely impressive. Highland Park is Orkney whiskey with Viking heritage, and it's got that perfect balance between Highland sweetness and island smoke that makes it uniquely special. The 12-year-old is complex: heather honey, smoke, dried fruit, subtle peat, and it's got layers that reveal themselves slowly as you drink it. Blokes who discover Highland Park usually become evangelical about it because it's everything you want Scotch to be. Sophisticated but not pretentious, complex but not intimidating, distinctively Scottish but accessible. Discovery typically comes later in the whiskey journey, when most obvious choices have been tried and something that challenges without punishing is needed. The Orkney location gives it mystique, the Viking imagery gives it romance, but the whiskey itself needs no marketing because it's genuinely stunning. Highland Park ranks here because it represents Scottish whiskey at its most balanced and beautiful. Neither too smoky nor too sweet, neither too strong nor too weak. Just absolutely perfect for anyone who wants to understand what great Scotch tastes like. Talisker is sky whiskey with the sea in every sip. Briny, peppery, smoky, with a distinctive maritime character that's unlike anything else in Scotland. The 10-year-old is powerful stuff, 45.8% alcohol, full of peat smoke and sea spray, with a spicy finish that explodes on your tongue like a bonfire on the beach. It's not beginner whiskey. This is for blokes who've graduated through the ranks and are ready for something that demands respect and attention. Talisker often gets discovered on trips to Scotland, and people fall in love with its wild character, buying bottles to remind them of standing on cliffs watching Atlantic storms roll in. Robert Louis Stevenson called it the king o' drinks. And he wasn't wrong. This is whiskey with personality, drama, and an uncompromising Scottish character that refuses to be tamed or smoothed for international markets. Talisker ranks this high because it's genuinely world-class whiskey that captures the essence of the Scottish Islands in a bottle. And once you've tasted it properly, everything else seems a bit safe and boring. Lagavulin is Islay whiskey at its most refined. 16 years of aging has taken raw, peaty spirit and turned it into something sophisticated, complex, and utterly magnificent. The taste is smoke, seaweed, iodine, dried fruit, and a richness that coats your mouth and lingers for minutes after you've swallowed. It's not for everyone. Some people taste Lagavulin and think someone's emptied an ashtray into their whiskey. But for those who get it, there's nothing else like it anywhere in the world. After years of drinking Highland and Speyside malts, Lagavulin represents a fork in the road. It either becomes your favourite whiskey forever, or you decide Islay isn't for you. There's no middle ground with Lagavulin. You either love it with religious fervour, or you hate it, and both reactions are completely valid. It ranks third because it's as close to perfect as peated whiskey gets. Powerful but balanced, smoky but sweet, challenging but rewarding. If you want to understand what Scottish whiskey can achieve when quality is the only consideration, Lagavulin 16 is where you start. Macallan is luxury Speyside whiskey with a reputation for excellence that's been earned over 2 centuries. The 12-year-old sherry oak is matured exclusively in hand-picked sherry casks from Spain, and that shows in every sip, rich, fruity, with dark chocolate, dried fruit, and warming spice. It's whiskey for special occasions, for celebrating promotions and anniversaries, for drinking slowly while contemplating life. First bottles of Macallan usually come with bonuses or pay rises, and they get rationed carefully, because even though it's not the most expensive whiskey out there, it feels precious. The taste is luxurious without being heavy, complex without being challenging, refined without being boring. Macallan represents the pinnacle of Speyside distilling, proof that gentle, fruity, unpeated whiskey can be just as compelling as smoke monsters from Islay. It ranks second because it's genuinely among the finest whiskies Scotland produces, and the consistency of quality across decades proves that Macallan's reputation isn't just marketing. It's earned with every bottle. Glenfarclas 105 is cask strength, sherried Speyside whiskey at 60% alcohol, and it's the greatest expression of what Scottish whiskey can be when a family-owned distillery refuses to compromise for over 180 years. It's powerful, intense, incredibly complex. Christmas cake, dark chocolate, orange peel, tobacco, leather, and a depth of flavour that seems impossible from a bottle of whiskey. You add water to bring it down to drinking strength, and as the alcohol dilutes, new flavours emerge like magic. This is whiskey that demands attention, time, and respect. Blokes who've worked their way through the ranks of Scottish whiskey eventually discover Glenfarclas, and many never leave because why would you when you've found perfection? The Glenfarclas family has owned and run this distillery since 1865, never sold out to corporations, never compromised quality for profit, and the 105 proves that independence and integrity create better whiskey than any amount of marketing budget. It ranks first because it represents everything great about Scottish whiskey: heritage, craftsmanship, family pride, uncompromising quality, and absolute dedication to making the best possible spirit. This is whiskey for people who drink whiskey, and if you've never experienced what cask-strength sherried Speyside can do, you haven't really understood what Scottish distilling is capable of. From supermarket blend to cask-strength perfection, Scottish whiskey is 2 centuries of tradition in every bottle. If this ranking's made you thirsty or furious, hit subscribe and watch the next video on screen where we rank something else that'll get you arguing.